In what ways does a media product use, develop or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? Front cover. The front cover of my magazine playlist uses, challenges and develops certain conventions in effective ways and forms. The conventional aspects of my magazine are likely to be used in other media products. One of the main conventions that is used are formal conventions such as the layout of the cover lines, which are laid out around images and are in equal positions to give the front cover a neat and polished look. Another main convention I used was to use the main image as the background of the magazine that represents the main article for the double-page spread. The main image is a medium close-up shot. This represents the genre of the magazine, which can be identified through the mise-en-scène, as it is a general interest magazine. This convention is also used in other publications such as Q magazine. Using various types of images and text means that positioning everything in its suitable place shows that layout is a key aspect of producing a front cover. Therefore, it being conventional allows ease to reposition, decrease and increase size of text and images. The layout also allows me to make constructive decisions on whether the front cover is crowded by text or images, or whether covering dead space is unnecessary and that relevant space is needed, or on the other hand, whether there is too much dead space, therefore according to the layout there should be more content. I also used institutional conventions, such as using a masthead, barcode, date, price and issue number. A typical convention that I used is used across different media products, and this being the masthead. I used a very bold font for the masthead to make it stand out and make it conventional. It represents my general interest magazine. The colour of the masthead is black. It is a simple and distinct colour, as it is a typical colour used in many publications. The colour of the masthead draws attention to the eye against the background and is also one of the colours from my house style. I also developed this convention by using a font that uses an outline of the letter rather than a standard font used in Q and Wheel of Pop magazine. Another convention I used for the masthead was for it to be obscured by the main image, to give the magazine a status as being well established, which is used in publications such as Q and Hip Hop Weekly magazine. Another institutional convention I used is the barcode, which can be placed anywhere on the cover of the magazine, which is often along the edges, but can be repositioned according to images and cover lines. The barcode usually consists of the price and issue date, but I developed this convention by using a barcode and repositioning the price and issue date almost separate to give its own identity. Another convention I use is typography, which is consistent throughout a magazine, and in this case I used the same font throughout. To establish which font I wanted to use, I referred back to my typography research and decided to use a font that represents my magazine genre. I used the serif font across my magazine, as this type of font style represents modernism, which in this case my magazine is. I used another convention by changing the colour of the font according to the house style by having the headlines in the same colour and the cover lines in another. A conventional aspect of the magazine is to use certain colours to represent the genre of the magazine, and in this case I used colours that represent a general interest magazine and to give it to the pop, hip hop, R&B look. The colours I used are black, blue, pink and yellow. One of the distinct conventions I used was to have the main cover line in bold and larger size compared to the other cover lines, to anchor the main image, which highlights the most important part of the publication. Contents page. The layout of my contents page generally represents a typical contents page which you would expect to see in other publications. By looking at the contents page, it doesn't look like an average page due to the type of colours I use, as they are quite distinct, but I have used a conventional layout that many other magazines use. One of the main conventions I used was to have a general column which divides different articles against others. This is used in all the issues of one magazine. For example, Q used this. I also used another convention of including images that represent other articles within the publication, and one of the main images represented the article for my double page spread, and another being for a particular column of the contents page, which is the playlist review. This is also used in the Q magazine. Another convention I used was to have the more important parts of the magazine in a larger size, and in this case, due to the playlist review being an important aspect of the magazine, it is larger in size and takes up most of the space on the right hand side to give its own spotlight. I also used a typical convention of using particular colours, and in this case I made the headlines in one colour and the cover lines beneath in another. I use consistent colours for the text within each column. For example, in the general column, I use pink for the headline and blue for the text beneath. I use this colour so that a reader can differentiate between different articles. Alongside these, I use the formal convention of having page numbers as a form of navigation, as this is one of the main things that a reader would refer to when wanting to know which article is on which page. Another convention I used was to make particular text stand out by putting them against a darker shade of colour, and in this case I used vibrant colours for text, so it was ideal to use a darker colour as a background, as this enables the reader to easily read the text. Another convention I use is to have a subscription box on the contents page. Although the positioning of this varies, as some publications have this on the cover of the magazine alongside the barcode, I decided to use this on my contents page. I used another typical convention of having the website address of the magazine along the footer, which is consistent throughout. This is also a form of navigation. I used and challenged conventions, as I use a mixture of stereotypes and counter-stereotypes in my images, and also challenged stereotypes by using people of other ethnic backgrounds, and did this as I had a mixed response of what ethnic background my audience is from my questionnaire. Double page spread. My double page spread follows similar conventions as other publications in this era, and one of the main inspirations being Q magazine. Although Q is not a publication that directly represents my genre, it consists of some of the genres my magazine represents. One of the main conventions I used was to have a main image, which dominates one of the sides of the double page spread, and in this case I chose for it to dominate the left. The image I used directly links to the image from the front cover of the magazine, and once again represents my genre of a general interest magazine that consists of the popular genres. The mise-en-scène of the image is quite conventional in terms of the model representing hip-hop R&B, as she is wearing a gold cross chain with a hat. I developed the convention of the image being staged in the sense that the image itself is quite effective, as it is a shot of her singing live rather than the image choreographed, and also using an image that isn't overly edited to give it a natural live view to give the audience a realistic insight of the session. Another convention I slightly developed was to have a caption of the main image, and in this case I took a humorous approach, as instead of having a caption with information of the photographer and what the artist is doing, I challenged this by incorporating some humour to relate to the reader and also to walk offside the norm. Another convention I used was to use another image which is smaller in size to the main image, and in this case I used a behind the scenes image. It is effective as it fills up the space, making the overall look of the double page spread less empty. One of the main conventions is house style, which is a key aspect of any publication, as it runs throughout the magazine and links all the pages together. And so the main colours I used are black, yellow, blue and pink. My double page spread uses the house style effectively, as I use these colours distinctively. For example, having a thin blue border around the small image on the double page spread, and using the house style colours for different text on the page, as I use yellow for the caption of the main image against a black background to not only make the text more visible but also to have a hint of the house style. I also use the house style for the main heading of the article and the stamp verse by having the main heading in pink, which directly links to the front cover of the magazine, as it uses the same colour, and also using blue as a stand verse to make the overall appearance of the double page spread look appealing to the eye. The key concept I used was to not overuse the colours of the house style, but to use small fragments of it across the page. I also used a convention which is consistent throughout the magazine, and this being to have the page numbers on the left and right side along the footer, the website on the magazine, and also the issue date, and in this case I used a thin black rectangular strip across the footer of the double page spread to allow the text to be more visible. This once again follows the house style and is generally used in most publications. Another convention I used was to have a kick on the double page spread as a form of navigation for the reader to refer to. One of the main conventions I followed was the layout of the article, as the heading of the article is in a larger size to the body text, and the stamp first is in a slightly smaller size to the heading. I also used the convention of using serif font for the heading and the stamp first, and in this case I used the same font that runs throughout the magazine to keep in line with consistency. One of the main conventions I used was to have my body text dominate one of the sides of my double page spread, and in this case I'll write in 3 separate columns in the form of an interview. I developed and challenged a convention by using a drop capital and serif font, which is the same font used for my masthead on the cover of the magazine. I challenged convention by using a size 10 font rather than the typical 12, as it is best suited for my article's appearance and quantity.